Hello, Simon Rainier, Link Sarmatar out of Kamloops, British Columbia, and this is Saber. If you haven't met him before, he is desperate for attention this morning. So this is going to be a follow-up to the mead making video I made a while back. Originally I was going to do like a tasting video, and then I watched a bunch of tasting videos and realized that they are boring as fuck. You can't taste it, so watching me describe the flavors, maybe that's your thing, and that's fine, but it's not my thing, so I'm not going to make something that I wouldn't enjoy. Instead, what this is going to be is sort of a what I wish I knew when I started making mead. Two specific aspects of it, which are going to be, if you've read the title of this video, alcohol content, that's contact or alcohol. Alcohol content and sweetness and how they relate to each other and how to control it. Because for whatever reason, there's not a lot of that kind of information out there readily available. So this is sort of based on a lot of research I've done and a lot of experimentation I've done. First, let's kind of talk base ingredients. So start with, we have water. When I started making mead at the very beginning, I was really picky about the water. I got like super nice well water, that kind of thing. Now that I've done it a few more times, I did the boiling of the water a few times, and then I eventually just kind of started using tap water. Basic rule of thumb, according to people I've talked to, seems to be is if you like to drink your tap water is okay for mead making. Where I am, they don't put a whole lot of stuff in it, so it doesn't seem to affect the yeast and the fermentation at all. Everything seems to go just dandy. While we do this, I'm going to start doing some bottling as well, just because that's what I'm all about today. Yeah, so if you get good water, your product is going to be a little better, but if you can't get it or just are lazy or cheap, don't worry too much about it. And then figure out what's in your kind of municipal tap water. Well, I'll put a chair over so you can actually see what's going on. I have a bunch of well cleaned out bottles. This is a buckwheat small mead. I'm bottling it a little bit early. More on that later. Not overly fond of the buckwheat honey. It was kind of an experiment, and it's okay. It tastes kind of bitter to me. It has kind of bitter afternotes, which I'm not overly fond of. To me, being not a beer drinker, it kind of tastes like beer. So if that's your shtick, give it a shot. I have my handy dandy tube here. You'll see a lot of times, just let me grab that. Crash bang, crash bang. Fancy setups like this with called an auto siphon. Stick that in. This doesn't fit in my 1 gallon jug, so I can't use it. And I have a bottling wand at the end of that. It helps with bottling, but so far I've honestly found it to be more trouble than it's worth. Honestly, I kind of just recommend just the tube when I'm doing all my racking and bottling. Just a plain, simple siphon seems to work best. So, there's that. We've talked about the water. Next, of course, is the honey and the yeast, and specifically how they interact with each other. More honey means more alcohol and a sweeter product in theory. Now, yeast produces alcohol. That's just not revolutionary knowledge, I hope. And all yeast has a certain alcohol tolerance, which basically means a certain level in which it can create alcohol, and then the alcohol will basically poison the yeast. They're basically drowning in their own urine. Yay. So with that in mind, yeast eat sweetness to produce alcohol. They eat sugars, is the way it's most often described, but in this sense, it's probably more useful to say they eat sweetness. Depending on how much sweetness this is, that's how much alcohol gets produced up to a certain level. Now, the magic number is for every 1 gallon of product to 1 kilo, yes, I'm mixing units, deal with it, it's a little over 2 pounds, of honey, we get a specific gravity reading of 1.07, approximately. That's not a terribly useful number for most people. What that translates into is generally just under 10% alcohol. So for every kilo per gallon, you get approximately 10% alcohol. A lot of my small meads are about half that, and they reliably come in at 4-point-something% if I let them go completely dry, which means it's used up all of its sweetness. With that in mind, we can, in theory, every 100 grams of honey, up or down, adjust the alcohol content. So, useful information. Again, super easy. 1 kilo equals 10%, roughly. In my experience, it's usually slightly under. 9-point-something is usually about what I get off a kilo of honey. My small meads, I generally go between 500 grams and a kilo, and it's the 500 grams usually sits around 4.3%. I think it was the last couple. We'll do a reading of this one and see what it comes out to as well. This was 500 grams of honey for this. Anyway, so with that, assuming those numbers, in order to get any kind of sweetness off a finished product, there are a number of ways we can do this. First off, we can kill the yeast early. There's something called cold crashing, which is basically you put it in the fridge. This doesn't kill the yeast, it just makes it dormant, so if you pull it out again, the yeast are going to start up again and start making alcohol, and if your bottles are not designed to handle carbonation, they can explode your bottles. I don't really like this method as a reliable method. What I will do a lot of times with my small mead is I'll bottle early, after usually about 3 weeks, when it still has some residual sweetness, throw it in the fridge, and then you get a nice, sweet, fizzy drink. That's not a long-term solution. I generally drink it relatively quickly, so it's not a big deal. Most yeasts, for example, the Lavlin D47, which is a wine yeast, and the ale yeast, have about a 14% alcohol tolerance, roughly. So, what that means is in order to have any kind of residual sweetness when the yeasts have done their entire shtick and eaten up all the sugars they're going to and died, you need at least 1.5 kilos of honey to go into it. And, 14% might be a lot for you. You might want it less. From what I understand, bread yeast has a tolerance of about 9%. And I've made a couple of small meads with bread yeast and they turned out just fine. So you can do that if you're extra cheap or just can't get access to wine yeasts, which I understand is a problem in some places. There's 2 other methods. The first is pasteurization, which basically you heat up your brew until the point where the yeast die off. I haven't done this yet. I might try at some point, but I don't know how as of yet. But I will figure that out eventually, I'm sure. The other way is to add, there's some chemical additives, potassium sorbate, and one other one I can't remember offhand. And that will destroy the yeast's ability to reproduce and kill the yeast. Again, I don't really want to use this method for what I do. If I were to, say, commercially sell this stuff, which I'm not currently, that might be another story. But as of yet, yeah, I prefer to let it go to completion or bottle early and stick it in the fridge. So, yeah, that's basics of what I wanted to say for it. If you want like sweetness, go above the alcohol tolerance of the yeast, the more honey you add, the sweeter it'll be after that 1 point. Up until that point, all you're doing is making a stronger alcohol. If that's what you want, that's what you want. And so check the yeast tolerance of what you're doing, basically. I use a champagne yeast occasionally. That's up to like 19%. Yeah, and get a hydrometer. That's just a tube for it. Hydrometer's back there somewhere. It'll help you a lot, but if you don't have it, you can use that general guideline. 1 kilo is 10%, and just kind of taste it. And if there's any residual sweetness, you'll know. You'll be able to taste the sweetness. And if it's gone completely dry, which I really like a dry mead, if it's gone completely dry, then it's probably done. And you can rack, bottle, whatever you're going to do with it. So, cheerio.